I'm having a little night walk, and so you can actually hear some of those crickets outside. And, well, that's ironically not not what we're experiencing now. What we're experiencing as of March of 2026 is anything but crickets in the middle of the night. That might be what will come to pass after March of 2026, but, fingers crossed. Not so ironically, March of 2026 and the events that have been happening, well, ever since February of 2026, ever since February of 2026, I may have just accidentally spoken the future through a slip of the tongue, but, well, there are no accidents in this world. Let's get to the meat of this argument, and not the meat of this war and the victims of this war. So, March of 2026, for those of us that are astrologically inclined, Saturn and Neptune have been retrograding back and forth between Pisces and Aries for a while now. Neptune is in a really good place in Pisces. In fact, Neptune is considered the modern ruler of Pisces and not Jupiter. And Neptune is, in many ways, a higher octave of Jupiter, in which that Neptune is so expansive, so much of the expansiveness of Jupiter, that it becomes immaterial. After all, for the material world to exist as it does, there has to be boundaries. The boundaries of Saturn, in which Saturn in Aries, well, Saturn is in fallen Aries. You're trying to contain this explosion. Saturn is the container. Saturn is the chains to an explosion. In other words, chains don't hold an explosion very well, especially the explosions of thermobaric devices. And we've quite literally been seeing that play out where, underground bunkers are being blown up. News just came in not too long ago that both Benjamin Netanyahu and Ali Khamenei have been hit. They have both been hit now. So before it was just, the supreme leader of Iran will, recent news states that possibly at least Benjamin Netanyahu's bunker has been hit pretty hard. And Jupiter has been retrograding Cancer for quite a while now. But now Jupiter is going fully direct. And, Saturn, while of course Saturn and Neptune are both going to retrograde in Aries quite a bit, they are now officially in Aries. They're not going back into Pisces for quite a while now. They're going to be staying in Aries for a bit. So what you have is Saturn in fall conjunct with a higher octave of Jupiter, so high of an octave that it's, immaterial. Pisces represents dissolution and, well, thermobaric weapons. It's not nuclear yet, but, these bunker busters and these explosives, they can get pretty hot. And they can get pretty powerful to the point where it pretty much atomizes everything around it. It just turns everything around it. Well, it absorbs it into this ocean of fire and steam and, destruction. If you're within that blast radius, you're gone. There's not much that can stand between you and that explosion. Condolences for those that have been lost to it, on all sides. And I say this as someone who has not only been in the U.S. Army, although, you know, many can claim that my military career was less than glamorous. But, you know, I've done some things after I left the Army, and, you know, I've come to learn very quickly that we all have our reasons for what we do. We all have our justifications for what we do, and so, you know, that along with, you know, studying what I study and talking about what we talk about on this channel, it comes as no surprise that my idea of good and evil isn't so readily aligned with most of the population's idea of good and evil. You know, Jupiter in Cancer has been retrograde for a while. And so when a planet is in retrograde, it kind of slows down, or it kind of goes in the opposite effect. And it's not to say that, you know, for instance, Jupiter in retrograde acts like Saturn, or Saturn in retrograde acts like Jupiter, you know, given those examples. It's more along the lines of Saturn retrograde is less Saturn, it's less restrictive, and it's delayed. You know, so you're delaying delays. In other words, things are building up, they're just kind of building up under the surface. And same thing with Jupiter in retrograde, you know. Jupiter in retrograde is more of just kind of building things up under the surface. And now that Jupiter is direct, along with Neptune in Aries conjunct Saturn, you know, Jupiter is direct in its sign of exaltation right now in Cancer. You know, you're seeing the breaking down of the barriers of Saturn. Well, Saturn represents old age. You know, you're seeing a lot of old leaders getting, you know, wiped out, and doesn't seem like their underground bunkers or their structures that they've built are really, you know, doing much good for them. And, you know, a lot of the structures of Saturn are being broken down right now. But, you know, as someone that works a lot of freelance businesses, and, you know, that does a lot of freelance work throughout my life, and, you know, a lot of them were just trust-based. You know, I knew a guy, he knew me, he needed some help, I offered some help, kind of a deal. You know, it kind of, well, you know, there's been a lot of bureaucracy, you know, forming over the past few years. You're seeing more regulation, more control. And I'm sure a lot of it is intentional, you know, to stamp out the little man, because, you know, if you don't prevent something when it's small, you know, it's going to grow out of control. And, you know, given that everything, you know, has both positives and negatives, well, if you're in competition, which, you know, a lot of businesses are in competition, most people in this world operate on a physical, purely mundane and scarcity principle. They are simply uninitiated. And so these people end up feeling the need to stamp out their competitors. Well, you know, you're seeing the after effects of that. You're seeing the effects of trying to contain your enemy. You know, spoiler alert, but when the supreme leader of Iran was killed, it's not like they just suddenly stopped fighting. No, they figured, well, you know, they're going to get their asses kicked either way, so might as well just let off all your missiles and, you know, finish the job while you still have the chance. Well, they've been doing that. I mean, you know, news has come back that you know, a lot of these countries in the Gulf region, including some American installations, have been hit. Israel, Tel Aviv, you know, they have been hit. You know, Iran has been hit, you know, numerous times, but it's not like the rest of us are just safe. Now, I'm not saying you need to panic. I'm not saying you gotta freak the fuck out and be like, oh my god, we gotta go hide in a bunker. Because like I've said, you know, the chains of Saturn, well, they're melting. And we're seeing that these nuclear, you know, these underground bunkers, they're not working so well. Now, mind you, there's still a lot of sites that haven't been hit yet, and, you know, there's still a lot of missiles being let off, but it's slowly and surely collapsing. And so, you know, I was trying to upload another video earlier. Unfortunately, there were some problems with the uploading, but, you know, that's it now, so enjoy it. I might upload the video that I've had issues with uploading, or I might just upload this, so now you get two videos in case there's anything that I missed there, or things that I talked about in that video that I haven't talked about, and vice versa. So that'll be it. Take care.